Interestingly, I grew up in a community in Southern California. It's called Loma Linda. It's the largest grouping of Seventh-day Adventist Christians in the world. So it's a small city, and one of the things that it's known for is for being Seventh-day Adventist, but also the medical institution that's there. A lot is based around the religion and the medical field. So I think everybody has the expectation that you will do something along the lines of health, but also coming up from my community where it was very religious community. They had very strict rules almost. I felt like that took on forced me to take on a lot of things into my identity that come along with being very strict and being very normal and not going outside of this comfort zone, I guess. So like every day before school, we would gather as a family, me, my brother, my older sister, and my parents. So the five of us, I'm the youngest. And we would have devotion together. I just remember being very tired every morning and waking up and rubbing my eyes and us reading the Bible. And we would read in a circle or like read around the group, which was always something I was always very nervous about because I didn't feel super comfortable reading out loud when I was little. And then also just the routineness of it kind of put me in a guard type of way to always feel like I had to do this thing, like it was a part of who we were as a family. And we did the same thing with our prayers. Like when it came time at the end of the readings, we would pray and we would go from youngest to oldest, and I'm the youngest. And I always felt like this intense pressure. Every time we would read around in a circle, before my turn, I would get very nervous. And then also when the prayers would come, I would get very nervous that like I'm the first one that has to say something. But that was kind of like our dynamic, and always for sure at the dinner table together as a family, and starting each meal off with prayer and things like that. Because my sister's the oldest, I think I could recognize that she was raised in a way that was like, we want you to achieve a lot, and we have high expectations of what you're going to achieve as our eldest child, from my parents' perspective. And then my brother, I think he kind of had his own personality, which was very fiery and like very strong. And being the youngest in that group, I think I naturally found myself to be a very quiet person and to kind of do a lot of listening and not to interject too much unless it was to play peacemaker in my family. I did that a lot. Being peacemaker between my brother and my sister, who were much closer in age, and they would argue a lot. I would find myself, especially defending my sister a lot, because my brother is so strong in nature. So I think that's where I naturally fell into my family in terms of only interjecting when it was something to bring peace to the family. From a community of a small population of Black people, so a lot of white people, a lot of Asians. So there was this, what they call code switching that I did constantly, and I still do, where in the different moments I would change who I was to fit into the different groups. So I never necessarily felt like, when I was with like a lot of white people, I felt like, now I'm the Black person and I have to be this type of person to fit into this group. Then when I went to the Black groups, then it was like you had to be Black enough. And there was this whole thing around, if you're not listening to hip hop, if you're not playing sports and playing basketball, if you're not like having this certain swagger and bravado about yourself, that you're not enough for our community and you're like an outsider. And then playing between those two worlds, I found myself ending up a lot in the middle, where the white people would consider me to be somebody who's like or both sides I think would consider me to be like an Oreo, what they call, like you're Black on the outside but you're white on the inside, or like what the Black people would say like as an Uncle Tom, like you don't really fit in with us because of where you come from. You don't come from the streets, and then from the same side, from the other side, you don't fit in with us either because you're Black. So it was always this dance of, where do I fit in? Who are my people? And I think it was something that's still heavy to this day. Yeah. I think Asian people, especially in my community, I don't know if this is a stereotype, but it seems like it held in my community where Asians were, they had a different community group of their own where it was like, they're out there to try and strive for greatness in school and be on the top of every class. And I don't think there was ever a moment where I thought, oh, I could fit into this group. Like, I don't look like them and I don't act like them either. But just from being in the community that I grew up in and having to switch between roles so often, I felt very comfortable switching into pretty much any group that I came across. Even to this day, like, I can always find things that I have in common with different groups. So I guess in that sense, it's kind of helped, but it's kind of muted the person that I am just in my own being. I think the inner voice oftentimes just tells me that I'm an individual, and to stop trying to fit into different groups. And it's a constant voice that's always within me, but I think I tell it to be quiet a lot. And more recently, I've been trying to get that inner voice to be the only voice. But certainly growing up and having to feel like you have to fit in, like it was a voice that I quieted and tried to shush as much as possible so that I wouldn't ever have to feel cut off from a community.
I think I'm a good person. I try to always do the right thing. That's kind of my motto. If you always think about, doing the right thing, especially when you interface with others, how you would like other people to treat you is the right thing as far as you're concerned. And maybe the right thing is different for different people, but I think that's part of what the world is missing today. There's not enough respect for others. The family is, I think, extremely important, and especially in minorities where there's not a lot of income and fathers typically aren't involved in the children's life as much. And I think it really deteriorates the quality of the way people treat each other.
That was a very deep and dark process to go through, and I'm still going through it currently. But about 4 years ago, I started digging into myself and trying to figure out more about myself and asking myself what I believed in and things like that. I made the decision that I no longer believe in Seventh-day Adventism, questioning all these doubts that I had before, but I had never really dug into. And when it came down to it, then I realized that I didn't believe it. And that because I didn't believe it, that it kind of also opened me up to say, now I have to kind of define who I am. For maybe a 2-year period, I didn't really know who I was. And I didn't have anyone to turn to because I felt like my dad, who was one of my closest connections growing up, he's obviously Seventh-day Adventist and very conservative and a big member of the church, and also was a teacher at my high school, which was Seventh-day Adventist. So I felt like I didn't really have anybody to turn to or anybody to ask about these hard questions.
You should be able to say and think the way you want to. And you can't and you shouldn't try and force your values on other people. I mean, those are your values, and for you to figure out what you want to do with them, how you want to live your life. And I don't agree with a lot of them, but it doesn't mean that I'm right and they're wrong.
Writing has helped me out to get out of that process of not knowing who I was and having this big change that now that I'm writing, I can write who I am and figure out who that is. And writing, just like with talking with people and being honest, requires you to strip away all these layers, all these walls, and be very vulnerable. And you can't really BS your way around writing. When people read, they're gonna know whether or not it's truthful. So from that moment on, I was very determined to tell my dad who I was. So the very first thing I started writing was also going into this piece of, I had called my dad on a night to tell him that I stopped believing in the Bible and stopped believing in Jesus. and he hadn't picked up. And I had called him 3 or 4 times and texted him also that I had something very important to share. And he hadn't responded for the entire night, which was something that was not normal. And it was weighing on me very heavily, and I was really afraid of speaking up and voicing to him, and it felt like I was betraying him, and that this was like the largest thing that I could tell my parents. Like, I could tell them that if I told them that I was gay, or if I told them that I had committed a crime, or those things would have all been less from the community that I come from and from the family that I come from than just telling them that this is what I believe. So when I finally told him, then it felt very freeing, but also still just as scary as the moments before, knowing that though he hadn't said anything really, that I could know from knowing him that inside of him, he's like afraid for my soul, and that this is a moment for him that he feels like he probably failed as a father. So I think writing that down was the only thing that I knew how to do. Last 2 weeks, I've been talking with my dad pretty much every day about this process and about what it means to me, what it means where I'm at right now. And he's really more curious now about the process of where I got to be. And some of that I think is like he wants to connect with me, but some of that I know is also him in his mind still hoping that I can be Seventh-day Adventist or turn back to what is comfortable for him. So I think me changing has also challenged him to define a new role as a parent that he didn't think he would have to go into before.
My first business partner. And it didn't turn out well, but I understand why it turned out the way it does. And he gave me opportunity. I mean, he hired me right out of college. 40 years of working with him. We got to be business partners. I owned part of the business. And then he fired me. But in the board meeting where he fired me, he said the most important person to him was his daughter.
My mom, I feel like she was always there. And then probably my wife too, she taught me a lot about being brave, which is something I think in our society that is a quality of women, because bravery requires that there was something to be afraid of or something to be apprehensive about, and then still pushing through. I noticed that almost all of my role models are women.